Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. It is your favorite Dark Sorcerer here. And today, I'd like to do some book reviews for you. I've been getting a lot of questions lately as to where can somebody find the necessary rituals or rites or even historical accounts, things that they can reference and actually learn and study for themselves. So I thought I'd take a couple of minutes and kind of just explain to you why I got into this stuff and show you these books as I do and my personal thoughts on them. Now, before I do, you have to understand that there are different variations of necromancy worldwide. Hey, Alfredo. You have two versions in Greek, one in Latin and one in Egyptian. Okay? You got the Roman, which is Italian or Latin necromancy. You have Greek necromancy and you have Egyptian necromancy. But you've also got European, roots and values in it as well, going from, say, the hexa, for an example, which is Swedish and meaning witch or witchcraft, okay, in general. We know that the church, the JCI, literally has classified 4 examples of what witchcraft is defined by: witchcraft, necromancy, divination, and possession. Okay. The two in Greek, you have nigromancy and nekia. Okay. In Latin, you have nigromancy. Okay. Latin is nigromancy. Greek is nekia and necromancy. Okay. Now this is what most people go by today, without getting into other regions of the world, such as the AJ, the AJ, or A. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's AJ E. AJ, I believe it's how it's pronounced. Salute 367. Welcome to the channel. So, anyways, after modern events, I'm not really a big fan of this guy. I find him to be arrogant, self-centered, egotistical, and a drama queen. But I have to give it up for his works because of the fact you got to give this work props. This was actually my very first book on necromancy. Okay? This book really opened my eyes up to what necromancy is and what it was, because up until that point, I always thought that spiritual summonings through invocations and evocations was necromancy. Bringing the demons into yourself and a form of possession. Standing against what the church says. Getting into historical accounts of necromancy, however, proved otherwise. So, like I said, I've had this book for a while now, and this book here was actually published, if I remember correctly here, in 2011. So yeah, it's been about a decade. And when I first got into necromancy itself, and I first started getting interested in necromancy around 2010. So it has been a decade. Now, this book here aligns with Lucien Raphael's book, Necromancy, The Forbidden Arts. Okay? Very good book, I might add. Look him up. But secondly, this guy here has been praised by numerous different authors, numerous different elders within the witchcraft community. Okay? Christian Days, The Witch's Book of the Dead. Now, I actually liked this book because of the fact that not only did he give historical and mythological perspectives, But he went into oneomancy. He went into creating oils, rituals at the crossroads, the graveyards, um, you know, magical ethics, different tools that are used. The he went into the oracles, or the oracle or necromancy, divination with the dead. I mean, he went into so many different aspects in here. The only way I could say is that he must have spent at least a decade, no more than probably a decade, just preparing for this book alone. It was well thought out, it was well prepared, well referenced, bringing in Maat, for example, Isis, Kali, Hermes, Hades, Azrael, Anku, dealing with herbalism, dealing with oleums, alchemy, a whole bunch of stuff. I was highly, highly impressed with it. Enough that I literally have referenced it numerous times in my own videos. Okay. The next one is an individual that has 3 different editions out. He deals with numerology, astronomy, black magic, demonology, and yes, even necromancy itself. Okay. The basis of this one book is not just spiritualism. It's physical. It's an understanding of a practice that is ancient. This book was well written, well thought out. I recommend it to anyone. It's called The Black Arts by Richard Cavendish. He doesn't just talk about all of these things. He later brings in spiritualism, such as spiritual conjuration of Luciferage, Raphael, Astaroth, Beelzebub, Lucifer, and the like. He even brings in the 7 Olympic spirits, or that of the, I should say more accurately, the 7 crown princes of the air from the 6th and 7th books of Moses. The next book on the agenda, before I get into it, there's one more thing I want to say about Richard Cavendish's book. Bringing in numerology, such as the Greek Roman numerals, dealing with astrological symbols, planetary symbols even, not just that of the runes or spiritual names, is something that is quite powerful within rituals, not just in necromancy, but through Richard Cavendish, it led me to my next book. A lot of the books have referenced Eliphas Levi. There was a story that was told in numerous books, but never went into full detail of his encounter with black magic, specifically that of the first of the 7 forbidden arts, and that's necromancy. He went to London and he tried to get into this secret society, a coven. He was tapped on his shoulder by a woman in a veil, who was completely veiled, given a specific ritual to perform. It takes 3 days. It scared him so bad he left England and went back to Hermetism, back to Hermetics, the Kabbalah. Never step foot into black magic again. But I came across this book years ago, but I never got a chance to delve into it. Now I have it in paperback instead of hardcover. It is a very good book that has a lot of topics on Hermetism and Kabbalah workings. utilizing the names of God and all that other stuff. But it actually has the full, complete story and event of Eliphas Levi's journey into chiromancy, spiritual conjuration through necromancy. Okay? And it's called The Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic. Okay? That book I definitely recommend to you. Those books there, definitely. Now, when we get into more modern practices, you got to give it up for Sorcerer Cagliostro, the Necromancer. Blood Sorcery Bible, Volume 1 and 2. I liked her book because of the fact that out of all my time studying necromancy, demonolatry, Satanism in general, I never took the time to look at it from a medical perspective. Her book literally put me on the path to medical techniques, medical tools that can be used, such as electric shock, freezing the blood, drawing the blood, to actually using it in curses, hexes, and magic in general through necromantic rites, sorcery. She has at least 20 to 30 pages, 20 to 30 pages near the end of the book about just on medical techniques that can be utilized to draw the blood and to strengthen the practitioner's body. I really like that. And it's more of around quarter to a halfway to be precise. I just got into it. 30 sorcery events on how to read them. Let's see. Let's go in. Procedure. Yeah, it starts around 55, page 55. And it literally goes into, like I said, about 20 to 30 pages of just techniques, medical techniques. Very good book. I recommend the second one because it actually goes into spiritualism. Now, what's ironic about this is that that book actually got me into the historical values. And I found out that the medical community has been practicing necromancy now since the 16th century. In some cases, going all the way back to the 11th century. So, I mean, you're really seeing it from a whole nother perspective of how to harness the blood, how to freeze the blood, how to magnetize the blood, and how to use it within necromantic rites and practices. More so, to cut yourself. Modern day, it is known as cutting, but there's a difference between a medical diagnosis as a cutter doing it to try to control pain and that for a specific rite or ritual. It's known as bloodletting. Okay? And she literally tells you where to cut, how to cut, and what it's used for that specific section of the body. Magnificent. But she also tells her personal encounter with death and dying and how she became sensitive to the Da'ath energies. Very, very spectacular. You got to give it up for Sorcerer Cagliostro. Now, the next one is from the 15th century, but goes as far back as around the 13th century, possibly the 12th century. And it's known as the Munich manuscripts. Later, around the 15th century, became known as the Forbidden Rites. A Necromancer's Manual of the 15th Century. And this is forwarded and put forth by Richard Keffer. Now, those of you who like to experiment, those of you who like to follow certain illusionists, like, say, oh, let's go with Chris Angel, the Mind Freak. That guy's freaking spectacular. Okay? I kid you not, I'm a huge fan of Chris Angel. David Blaine, not so much. I mean, his earlier stuff, that was pure gold. But now it's more, it's more watered down. It's more for showbiz. You know, it's a look at me factor. Not really a big fan of David Blaine. But going back to David Copperfield or that of more famous magicians, illusionists even. You know, I've been a huge fan of these types for a long time. This book literally shows you techniques that were used, experiments that were used from the Munich manuscripts. It was something that I thought was very well put forth, very, very spectacular. It advanced my practices a lot, not just in demonology and satanic practices or even witchcraft techniques, but through necromancy itself. So I do recommend it. I mean, if you like the idea of being able to summon and petition an army out of nowhere, or a castle out of thin air, perhaps even a feast, like like something out of let's say Charmed, not the new one, the old one with the wizard, where he taps the scepter and up comes a chicken, you know, or a couple women to give him, you know, a massage. I'm talking actual practices, actual experiments that were done that were beneficial to the practitioners of that era. Very, very well put, very, very well put forth. My next book, however, this was when I got into the Mazajera Cabal system and I started studying necromancy again, getting really heavily influenced by it. I found it very, very interesting that most of the deities and spiritual beings that I was referencing hung around Iceland, you know, Celtic, Gaelic, Scandinavian, Slavic, even Germanic, Baltic, even. But for the most part, these deities kept me around Russia, Russian witchcraft. And I found it interesting and quite downright fascinating. The fact that Slavic witchcraft isn't just tied into the JCI system, but it was also mixed in with voodoo, which is an African Caribbean tradition. Okay, that ranges from Africa, the Congo, Malawi, Ethiopia, you know, region, South African traditions, even going all the way down into Haiti and Cuba and South America, splintering off, becoming Quimbanda, Ambanda, Santeria, Pelo Mayambi, you know, and then more modernly, over the last 20 some odd years, you also have Santa Morte, La Santa Morte, if you're following Spain. Okay, the Spaniards. Now, Santa Morte deals with death, Saint Death, Holy Death, based off Saint Mary. You know, the mother figure. She's a nurturer. She's a protector. She's a guide. She's a giver. Okay, but she's highly jealous, much like the JCI masculine god. So, and what's ironic is that necromancy has worked its way into so many different traditions, and that it's mind blowing. So, and I actually referenced this to an individual, and I gave him the wrong author's name. So I do have to apologize for that one. Slavic Witchcraft in Old World Conjuring Spells and Folklore by Natasha Helvin. I would recommend. Her second book is equally as impressive. I would recommend it because of its rich history and gnosis. Okay. Now, over a year ago, about 2 years ago, I ended up becoming acquainted with Balk, how to become a living god. And I started following E.A. Coetting's works and everything. And I didn't get any of his books until earlier this year, um, outside of the two that I already had from last year, which was Ipsicism, Ipsimus, and Evoking Eternity. Now, I've had those for about a year, and I actually sold those two to another occult practitioner because of the fact I didn't need them anymore, because they're a part of the complete works by E.A. Coetting. So I now have that plus 8 books in one book. And I've read this book thoroughly about twice now. And I'm now reading it for the third time, and I'm in the Works of Darkness. Now, but anyways, while I was following him, I got acquainted with S. Connolly. Who also wrote books on necromancy from her perspective as a demonologist. Okay, she is a what do they call them nowadays? Demonolator. Okay, in her in her part, demonolator. As a practicing demonolator, she has actually put forth a few books on necromancy. Now, while I was following this, I actually got associated with Edgar Cavall's work. And I really liked the way he spoke, the amount of knowledge he had of shamanism and necromancy. I've always known that those two really worked together at some point in history about 1,000 years ago. They had similar practices, but it was the techniques used that set them apart. Now, I actually sent him a friend request, and about a year later, he asked me to write. He not only befriended me and asked me to write a how should I say this, an essay for one of his books, which I do have, and I got a copy right here of it, and it's called Sabbatica. Okay, The Oracles of the Dead. Very, very good book. Okay, this one here has a lot of different authors, that have written essays for this book, and a lot of them bring something that's unique to the table, from Egyptian to Tibetan to Aztec to astrology and numerology, even the old grimoire traditions. And there was actually 2 individuals who wrote an essay for this book that I actually have known before. Now, one of which is S. Connolly, okay, and the other one is Ball Cadman. Okay, Ball Cadman, I've heard E.A. Coetting mention a few times in his videos. Now, I don't know much about the guy. I don't even know much about the kid. But after reading his essay, I have to say I'm impressed. Just like I'm impressed with all of these authors that wrote in this book, the essays for this book. Now, since then, I've actually written a second essay and currently working on the third, because I plan on putting my essays in my own book that I'm writing. But my point is that on page 58, Shaman versus Sorcerer. Okay? The grave songs. Going into, let me see if I can find it here. The Shaman and the Dead. Okay? Notes of South American Native Necromancy. Very spectacular. I love this essay. And this is how I actually found out that it was associated with Quimbanda. Now, I've practiced Quimbanda in the past when I was studying Palo Mayumbi in Santeria. But I had no clue that I wouldn't have, how should I say this? I shouldn't say I had no clue. It's more of the fact that the way I should put it is I didn't realize it was heavily influenced within necromantic rites and practices. I knew it had a lot of demonolatry, calling on Lucifer, Belial, Astaroth, and Leviathan, and going into the grave lords, and all of this stuff. But to see the Aztec and the Incan traditions, the Buddhist traditions, and the shaman aspects, it was absolutely mind blowing. So I highly recommend this book to you, and I would also recommend any book put forth by Edgar Cavall. I highly recommend it. Okay. Now the last book that I'm going to put forth is one by Bulk. Now, keep in mind with this book here, the author of this book I've heard so much about. He has starred in he's been mentioned in a couple of videos by E.A. Quetting. He even had a sit down once or twice with E.A. Quetting himself. But I've heard rumors that the guy is now Christian. He has turned away from anything to do with the occult. That he's asked E.A. Quetting not to deal with, to have any contact with him. Now, this is, like I said, this is just something that I've heard. It's nothing more than a rumor, and that's how I write it off as a rumor until I have hard facts on it. Basically hearing it from the horse's mouth themselves. But in this case, when I bought the complete works by E.A. Quetting, I also bought this book as well. And it came, for both of them, was shipping and handling through Amazon, came to about 117 to about 125 bucks max. Okay. Now, at first I was very disappointed with the Kingdom of Flames. But once I get into the works of darkness, it went from an amateur to a complete, professional occultist perspective. So that book, those books there were very, very influential, very good. I do recommend it. But this book here, Necromantic Sorcery, The Forbidden Rites of Death Magic, put forth by Dante Abiel. This one here. I've been very hesitant on getting this because of these rumors. Now, I've heard conflicting reports from people as well. Number one, the book is awesome. Number two, Dante, everything I just mentioned about Dante himself that I've heard rumors about. Now, like I said, those are just rumors to me. But after getting this book, sitting down and reading it, I've read it about 3 times now, and I'm currently on my 4th time through. I'm getting new things out of it. I'm getting a lot of new information out of it, things that I didn't catch the first couple of times. But to find it, the personal journey and of experiments and how he got into necromancy, how it drove him to insanity, the occult basis of it, the dark magic, the black magic, the dark sorcery of it, and how the spirits have chosen a dark object. Now, this is not the first time I've heard of having a dark object, like amulets or Orcrux or the mala beads, anathema or chalice, things of power that the spirits enchant and make powerful or direct link to that that graveyard or to the spirits, the spirits of the dead, like hell, for an example. Hel, the Norse version, not the Christian. So after watching the videos, I finally got enough money together, so I got these 2 books and I read it. I have to say that I'm impressed with this book as well because of the fact it's speaking from the journey aspect. It's more like reading something out of Dante, Dante's Inferno. It's like the journey into the underworld, journey into the purification process, becoming more and more powerful through sorcery than through physical mundane things. It's more that Dante was said to literally Don Quixote was said to, for an example, to have a scribe that every journey he took, he had the scribe write everything down, no matter how pompous or idiotic it was. He wrote it down into a scroll. But when you get into Dante's Inferno, for an example, the descent into the underworld, how he's speaking to a cardinal that not only imprisoned him, but stripped him of his pride, his home, his country. He was banned and shunned, um, and everything. The descent into the underworld literally tells the story of the descent into empowerment and purity. And what I liked about the necromantic sorcery by Dante was the fact that it came across in the same manner. It was his personal experience within necromancy. Unlike Sabbatica, which puts forth a simple, simplistic basis behind each practice from these different authors, or that of, say, Eliphas Levi, Richard Kekeffer, who put down physical applications of experimentation, the note-taking process. Dante literally spoke from personal values of how far he went, what the spirit he did for the spirits, and how the spirits helped him to gain power. You know, and then I'm thinking of Sumnus Dreadwood's works. Chanel Whispers, for an example, the best book I've ever come across on necromancy. Getting into profane seals, getting into the rites of the 13 tongues, the black scriptures, the oracles, books, even the Left Hand Path, Grimoire, all by Sumnus Dreadwood. Yeah, I have a whole new appreciation for necromancy, and which is probably why since January I've dedicated myself to necromancy on a full-time basis, digging up everything I can get my hands on from for an example, Google, to every book in my collection, delving into the Lazarus effects, to delving into history and mythology, going into the deities of the dead, such as Anubis, the protector of graveyards, the embalmer, he's the guardian of the grave, you know, the jackal, the dog-headed deity. And what's ironic though is when this was put forth to me, and I started delving into his the cult of Anubis. It was very, very amazing to see the difference between the cult of Isis, the cult of Artemis, the cult of Hecate, and seeing how it's more of a priesthood and priestesshood, and the things that they were willing to do for their deity from a spiritual perspective, seeing how it is implicated into medical practices, seeing how it gets into multiple different religions, seeing how it gets into the different deities, the different spellings, the different perceptions of necromancy. The Greek variation of it, Nicaea, is the oldest, goes back to like the 6th century. What was it? BE, I think it is. BCE, BE, something like that. And here I am writing a couple papers on it, keeping notes. At this point, I'm just doing note taking. I've written 2 essays of 4,000 words a piece. But to get into the actual practices, the applications, doing the fasting that I've been doing this month, the rituals that I've been putting forth. It's undeniable. Everything that I've read, everything I've studied thus far, everything that I've applied to the practices, the things that I'm being led to do within the form of black magic, sorcery, I have to say it's well worth it. There's no amount of money that can compare to the gnosis that you will gain through these studies. Have a good day. And until next time.